What if you're having experiences in this lifetime that are directly related to decisions that you made in prior lifetimes? Who's to say that we can't enter into binding agreements at some point in our soul's journey that persist through multiple cycles of incarnation? The concept of soul contracts and how they may be secretly shaping our reality is truly fascinating. And I'll be honest, as someone who believes in free will, I was pretty skeptical about the idea of soul contracts for a long time. That was until I met a well-known mythical figure on an ayahuasca journey. And more recently, when I was shown a past life where thousands of years ago, I made an agreement with a group of sorcerers that had long-lasting consequences. You're gonna wanna stick around for this one, because these stories might help you discover how hidden soul contracts could be having a big impact on your life today. So let's get into it. What's up? I'm Ian with Alternate Timelines, and today I'm going to be talking about soul contracts. I'm going to be sharing what they are, what they aren't, and a couple of personal stories to demonstrate how they've impacted my life. I'll also be sharing some tips on how to identify if you have any lingering soul contracts and some strategies on how to resolve them if they are present in your life. That'll come later in the video, so make sure you stick around. If you like this kind of content and find it valuable, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe. It doesn't cost anything, and it helps the channel immensely. Before we get into the stories, I want to talk a little bit about exactly what a soul contract is. Now, the name pretty much says it all. A soul contract is an agreement you make on a soul level. These sorts of contracts run much deeper than a temporary rental agreement. Because the soul is immortal, if you make an agreement on a soul level, it will stay with you and you will be bound to that through multiple lifetimes. A soul can enter into one of these agreements for any number of reasons. And we can make contracts with others. We can also make contracts with ourselves if there's something that on a deep level that we feel like we need to accomplish and want to commit to. These deep soul level commitments are usually quite profound and can have real implications in our everyday lives. And on a soul level, we are bound to the terms of those agreements that we make until those terms are fulfilled or the contract becomes nullified in one way or another, either through making a different agreement or just completely breaking the contract and making that choice intentionally at some point in the future. I'll elaborate on that a little bit more later in the video. But it's important to note that soul contracts aren't necessarily good or bad. When we make these deep commitments, we recognize that there are lessons that take a long time to learn and potentially multiple lifetimes. So in one sense, these soul contracts are really crucial to our soul's growth and development. That being said, like any contract, it's important to read the fine print and know the details and think it through very thoroughly, because there could be some unintended consequences from the decisions that we make to enter these deep binding contracts. Initially, I was skeptical of the whole idea of soul contracts. I believe that we all have free will, and in my mind, at the time, I thought those two things were conflicting. But I have since had experiences that shifted my perspective on this. The first experience I had occurred in Northern California, actually over a series of ayahuasca journeys. This experience happened several years ago while I was helping facilitate ceremonies for an ayahuasca church. We were at an incredibly beautiful and secluded space. I consider it to be sacred. I spent several weeks there over the course of 2 or 3 years and had many, many profound experiences on that land. So I'm helping to facilitate ceremonies, and one night during the ceremony, I'm doing my regular thing. I decided to go outside for some tobacco, which is something that I frequently worked with to help clear my energy and to help me navigate the space more effectively. I go outside, it's dark, there's beautiful hilltops. I'm out looking over them. It's a clear, starry night, no light pollution out there, like incredible scene. Looking out over the hills, and I sense an energy and an entity approaching me from the darkness. After facilitating many ceremonies, I got really used to encountering and interacting with entities. So I reached out to it and started communicating with it. And the mental image that I got was of the mythical creature Pan. Big goat head, human torso, human arms, and the lower body of a goat with hooved feet. I had no prior experience with Pan, and very little knowledge about this mythical creature. And if I'm being quite honest, I don't know if that was its actual form. Who knows? Maybe it was just projecting a mental image that it thought that I would recognize and be familiar with. I don't know. But that was the mental image that I got, was Pan. We were able to establish a very clear line of telepathic communication. I didn't sense any dark or malicious energy from it. It was just a very neutral sense that I got when I interacted with it. The one thing that did initially catch me off guard a little bit was the fact that it felt like there was a sense of familiarity with it. Like, I didn't consciously recognize it, but there was some part of me that I feel like did recognize it. And even in the way that it communicated with me, there was a sense of familiarity, and the ease at which we were able to establish that line of communication also kind of indicates that there was some prior communication, or that this wasn't the first time that we had opened that line of communication. But at that moment, I had no prior knowledge or conscious recollection of ever having an interaction with Pan. So there was a brief feeling out period, just kind of sensing each other's energy a little bit. And then it asked me a question. It said, "What would you like to know?" Which, when taken at face value, seems like a pretty benign question. But as soon as I heard it, I had this deep, resounding no. Under no circumstances should I ask any questions to this being. It was so clear. Under no circumstances should I ask this being any questions. Pan immediately recognized the shift in my energy. He's like, "Oh, just chill. If you have any questions, I can answer them for you. Isn't there anything you want to know or learn about? Anything at all, I can provide that information for you." At a deep intuitive level, I got a sense that he was being truthful and that he really could answer any of my questions. I also got the sense that any information that he provided to me would come at a cost. This was a relatively brief interaction. He asked if I had any questions. I gave him a firm no. There was a little bit more lingering in that space, but after that, we both went our separate ways. I didn't really want to have much more to do with Pan. From there, I went back into the ceremony and continued to do my thing. At some point, there was some downtime where I was able to lean into that experience and try to figure out what exactly happened there. The guidance I received when I leaned into my intuition was that at some point in my past, in a past life, I had asked Pan a question and gotten some information from him, not realizing how steep the price for that information would be. And ultimately, I was not thrilled with the consequences of that. Now, I don't know exactly what that was, what the details were, but there was this deep remembrance that no, do not interact with this guy. Do not ask him questions. Not worth it. Fast forward an entire year. Same group, same space, doing the same thing. I go outside and who do I meet? Pan. He's there. He doesn't ask me if I have any questions. He knows that it's a hard no, but he made himself present. Like, I could sense him very clearly. There wasn't a lot of interaction, but I knew he was there, which, whatever, fine by me. It's cool. It's like he's doing his thing and we're doing our thing. But like, as long as he's not coming into the space or wreaking havoc, whatever, he's free to do his thing. We're all sharing a space in some sense. But at some point during that ceremony weekend, I shared with the group of facilitators about my experience with Pan, and also my prior experience with Pan and what I learned from that and the feelings that I got. Shortly after, one of the facilitators pulled me aside and said, "Oh my gosh, I think Pan was here for me," because they had a question that they really wanted answered, and they came into the ceremony with this intention of getting this question answered, not being specific about how they were going to get that information. And just on an intuitive level, they knew that Pan was willing to offer that information to them, but they weren't consciously aware that there was going to be a price to pay for that information. So this facilitator was very grateful that I shared my story and that they had a better perspective and knew that maybe it wasn't the best idea to make this sort of a contract with Pan, even though maybe it wasn't an explicit contract, that there was going to be a price to pay for getting that information. I had been to that site in Northern California multiple times and only encountered Pan twice. And that was the extent of my interactions with that being. I am super curious and find these sorts of interactions endlessly fascinating. So if you have had an experience like this at any point in your life or have a good, juicy story to tell, leave a comment below and let's have a conversation. I'd love to hear other perspectives on this topic. After my interaction with Pan, it became abundantly clear to me that yes, soul contracts are indeed a real thing and they can impact our lives and our experiences. Which leads me to my second story, which occurred not all that long ago. This was well after I had stopped doing the ayahuasca ceremonies. At this point in my life, I was living in Montana and things were pretty good, but something just felt off. And I couldn't quite put my finger on what was going on. Like my energy just felt kind of low and I just couldn't get momentum in several areas of my life. And yeah, I just kind of felt lost and stuck all at the same time. While I don't work with psychedelics on a regular basis, and at this point in my life it's very infrequently, I still recognize that they can help give us a more nuanced and deeper perspective on certain situations in our lives. After struggling with some unknown feeling of stuckness for several weeks, I got the calling and it seemed appropriate to work with mushrooms. Not to the extent that I did before, not the high doses, but a relatively small dose just to tap in and see what was going on. My partner and I set up a little ceremony, got everything ready to go in our space, took the doses, and settled into our own meditative little cocoons. What happened next is something I will never forget. As the mushrooms start to come on, I feel myself sinking into that space. I feel like I'm in a different body, in a different time, and I perceive a sound that makes all of the hairs on my entire body stand on end. It was the roar of a saber-toothed tiger. Don't ask me how I knew what that sound was, but I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that that was what I'd heard. That was one of the most surreal experiences I've ever had. And what the mushroom showed me after that helped me to gain a better understanding of the situation that I was currently going through. So to summarize what happened, the mushrooms took me back to a past life. And I'm not entirely sure how long ago this life took place, but if there were saber-toothed tigers around, it would have had to have been before the end of the last ice age, about 13,000 years ago. So it would have had to have been at that time or earlier. And during that life, I was an indigenous person living with my tribe at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. I think maybe Colorado on the eastern slope, maybe Wyoming, somewhere in that area. And during that time, the climate was shifting, and my clan, my tribe, we were somehow associated with the bobcat. That was our totem. We were the bobcat tribe, and we lived in a place where there was trees and grass, but there was a lot of trees around. That's the natural habitat of the bobcat, and for whatever reason, that was our habitat as well. And because the climate was changing, the trees were becoming less and less. So our area that we typically inhabited was starting to shift into more of a grassland. And climate change was starting to cause some issues for us because it was changing how we lived our lives. Due to the change in the environment, there was another group of indigenous people, another tribe, that started to encroach on our land, or what was typically our ancestral land. The other group, their totem was the wolf. So we were the bobcat clan, and they were the wolf clan, and they were starting to take over our space because for whatever reason, wolves are obviously bigger and more powerful than bobcats, but I think they do better in an environment where there is fewer trees, like the plains. So over time, the Wolf Clan began to take over our territory, and there wasn't much we could do about it. And it finally got to the point where we had to make a decision. Are we going to either assimilate with them, or they're going to wipe us out, or we have to figure out a way to coexist with them? We basically had three options. One, to be wiped out. Two, to become slaves. Or three, we could decide to make a soul contract with the leaders of the Wolf Clan, which was a group of sorcerers, essentially. And in this agreement, we would allow them to siphon off some of our life force energy. And they would leave us alone, they would leave us our space. But it was really kind of like them taking a payment, almost like the mafia. We were paying them off with our spiritual energy so that we could continue to live. After much deliberation, the Bobcat clan decided that the third option was the best, to enter into this energetic soul contract agreement and to forfeit a certain percentage of our energy, of our life force, so that we could maintain somewhat of a normal lifestyle and continue to do what we were doing. As I started to see the bigger picture and recognize and learn about what happened in my past, things started to make more sense. I realized that I was still bound to this soul contract, and part of my life force energy was being diverted and sent off to this group of psychic, disincarnate ghost sorcerers who were still very much feeding off of, at least me anyway. I don't know about the other individuals that were in my clan, but they were still benefiting from this agreement. After the mushroom ceremony was over, I took some time to just integrate the experience, think about what I had learned, and come up with a potential solution. So one day I went on a very long hike by myself, called in my guides, and came up with this little ritual and ceremony that I did up in the mountains. It was essentially a cord cutting ceremony and a way to end that soul contract. I connected with the creepy group of sorcerers and said, I recognized that there was once a agreement between us that is no longer valid. You're not providing any protection. This agreement has been met on my end, and you're no longer providing anything to me. Therefore, this contract is null and void, completely over with, done. That's it. And from there, I felt an energetic shift. It wasn't a huge shift, and the amount of energy that was being siphoned off, it wasn't incredibly significant. It wasn't like a whole lot of energy, but it was persistent and it was having an impact on my life. And I find it kind of interesting that this happened after I had done a ton of work with different psychedelics, had done a lot of internal work and meditation. This soul contract was still lingering in the background and I was unaware of it. My personal belief is that we learn the things that we need to learn, and life and the universe presents us with situations at the time that we need to deal with them. I know that this came up for me when it came up because that was the right time and I had the right skills and the right level of understanding to be able to manage this situation appropriately. I don't look at that situation as bad or harmful. My personal belief is that everything that happens to me is for the purpose of my learning and growth. And I certainly learned something from that experience. And maybe one of the reasons that I had that experience was so that I could share it with other people and so that others could gain a greater perspective and learn about soul contracts. That brings us to the question, how do we know if we have soul contracts? And I think it's pretty safe to assume that on some level, we all have a certain degree of agreements that we've made with, again, either ourselves, with spirit, or with other individuals and spirits and entities. So the real question is, how do we know if we have any lingering soul contracts that are not helping us and they're not benefiting us in any way? How can we find out what they are and make them null and void and be free and clear of them? The easiest, most straightforward, and most effective way for us to identify whether or not we have any lingering soul contracts is through meditation. The word meditation essentially means to become aware of. And that's what we're trying to do here. You can't address an issue if you don't know that it exists or you don't know what the root cause of it is. Developing a meditation practice where you're intentionally setting aside time to be by yourself and to observe your own thoughts and behavioral patterns is going to be the most effective way to learn about things that are hiding under the surface that might not be present in our conscious minute-to-minute daily life. Through better knowing ourselves and this act of observation, we can better identify patterns and areas of our lives that are not in alignment with our deepest desires. When we notice an area of misalignment, well, we just observe it. We look at it objectively without putting labels or without judgment and just see what's going on there. Is this truly me, or is there something below the surface? We all have all of the answers to all of our questions within us. I know it can be tempting to look for resolution or seek help outside of ourselves, and sometimes that may be appropriate, but the first place and the first person we should always go to for answers and to find resolution is ourselves. Once you've identified that there is or may be some sort of soul contract in play in your life that's not benefiting you, initially, always, I go inward to my intuition and say, how can I resolve this? There are many different things you can do, cord cutting ceremonies, any number of ways to resolve any number of issues. But again, going inward is probably going to give you the best answer to your question in regards to that. I know there are many people out there who have their own opinions. They have their own ceremonies, their own ways of dealing with energetic attachments. And some of those people are very skilled. So if you don't feel like you have the resources or you've tried something and it doesn't seem to be getting the results that you want, you can always reach out to somebody potentially for assistance. In that, I highly, highly recommend using your discernment. Don't rush, take your time, find somebody who you really resonate with and truly believe can help you get the result that you want. Make sure that that person understands your situation very well and, again, on a deep level that you resonate with them. Also, it's important to be aware that if you do some sort of cord-cutting ceremony or intentionally sever some sort of energetic attachment, that these things can be reestablished. For example, if there's an ex that you're trying to distance yourself from energetically, say you go through a cord-cutting ceremony or you try to break the soul contract and you feel like you've accomplished it, well, if you're continuing to interact with them or you're checking up on their social media pages or there's objects in your space that remind you of them or that came from them, that can help reestablish these energetic connections. So just because you've gone through and done some work around severing energetic ties doesn't mean that the work ends right there and it's all said and done. Sometimes there's additional things that we need to do and take care of afterwards to maintain that energetic space that we've created through the ceremony or cutting those energetic bonds in a specific way. Often bringing resolution to a soul contract is a process. It's not something you can just snip and be completely done with it. That can happen sometimes, but usually it's a bit more prolonged than that. Remember, soul contracts are malleable. They don't define us. Just because you made an agreement on some level in the past or in a past life or at a different time doesn't mean that you can't make an adjustment to it or completely end that agreement. In one sense, time is real, and in another sense, time is totally an illusion. The only thing that is real that really matters, the only time where we can actually make a decision and make a change is right now in the present moment. And we do indeed have free will. The free will to choose what we want for ourselves right here, right now. You can choose to end any and all soul contracts. Now, that may not be the best thing that you want to do. There's probably a good reason for some of them, and some of those contracts may be helping you to learn something on your soul's journey. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. this isn't, again, necessarily a good or a bad thing. These are processes that help us learn on and grow on a spiritual level. And if you choose to look at things from that point of view, in some sense, everything is happening for our benefit if you value growth and learning. In my experience on my soul journey, I've recognized that I've entered into soul contracts with myself, with Source, and with external entities. Now, the whole entity conversation is really fascinating. That's why I made this video right here to share some of my own personal stories so that you can learn a bit more about them and how to interact with them. We'll see you there.